Today we're joined with Steve Polo, who's President and CEO of OPX Global, and also the Chairman of the Board of Global Impact, and my boss and my friend. And so it's such a joy to have you, Steve, with us and to share a little bit about your story and the journey that's taken you on and the impact that it's allowed you to make and how you think about the world. So welcome, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I'd like to reverse the order and actually eliminate the boss part. And as you mentioned, I'm the current board chair and about to pass the baton to the new generation of folks, which is a really interesting time and kind of exciting for the future of global impact. So thank you for the introduction.
Steve, share a little bit about your story and kind of your journey in life and how that's led you to your work and also your passions of today.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about what makes you who you are. And my grandfather emigrated to the US from Finland and lived with us for a time. And so Finnish and English were spoken in the house a lot when I was a child. And it made me, I think differently about what it was like even to be an American. My father spoke Finnish to me, and of course I promptly forgot it when I moved away. But the notion of, being able to attach to another culture, I thought of myself in retrospect as really more a citizen of the world rather than just somebody who lived in a place called Michigan. So that kind of, and as I was reflecting on this, I think that colored how I see the world. I wasn't conscious of it at the moment, but it did. I also have a real love for language, and so I was a Russian studies major in college, and I tell people that was really useful. That and $5, and you can get a cup of coffee. So, but again, it was another one of those things that gave me a view into world culture that opened my eyes about certain things. And sort of fast forward into my professional career, I had a moment where a friend of mine ran an internet company and was asked to donate money and a school for Nelson Mandela in South Africa. And at the time, the South African government was trying to build a number of schools. They were something like, 6,000 classrooms short. I mean, it was an appalling number. And my friend said, look, I promised this to the education initiative. Would you design the school? And we said, sure. And he said, well, will you do it for free? And I said, of course, what are you talking about? So we went to South Africa a number of times, and the school that the children of this settlement had was a metal box about 20 by 40. It didn't have any windows. It was open on the top and the bottom about a foot. It was terribly hot, and there were 240 children in this box. And when we designed something there was a brick factory nearby, and they made their bricks there locally. So we sourced that. We made Zulu patterns on the walls, and we created a courtyard with a bell that every child could ring once. Every day a different child could ring this bell, and it was really inspiring for us to be working with these folks. Well, we went to the meeting to present it, and we showed them the design, and the sponsor from the school board started crying. And he said, we've been waiting for this our whole lives. Well, I didn't actually know what to do, but no one has ever said that to me about anything, right? And I was certainly not expecting it. This was just what we did. But I didn't realize the impact that something like that would have. And I also saw that there was so much need for everything. It wasn't just, in South Africa has been one of those places that probably the only sub-Saharan country that avoided civil war. And that was because of Mandela, mainly. But it also was the character of the South African people. And so I was so inspired by working with them that, it turned my mind away from, what might have been kind of frivolous stuff in the US to thinking where could I have, not that I'd ever have that kind of impact necessarily again, but where could I have an impact? And, by some serendipitous, inner workings of the universe, I ended up at Global Impact. So that's my story.
That's powerful, Steve. And share a little bit about your work, not only with Global Impact, but OPX Global, because you really do a lot of strategy work and help people understand how place comes into their life and helps them do their work. Tell us a little bit more about some of that.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure where to start on that, but the notion that we're in the business of, in essence, of designing environments for people to thrive. So that's also kind of a, that's a kind of a big mantle to wear, right? Because you can think of it as just doing a thing like any other thing we do. But when you add this layer that the people who will be inhabiting these kinds of places and spaces and environments, are profoundly affected by that. And so how much you pay attention and how much you look at the effects of the things that you do, consequently have another big impact on those people who live and work and inhabit those environments. And so, we've taken on that task and taken it pretty seriously about how we, in essence, craft these environments where, as I said before, people can thrive and do their best work. So that's always in the background of our thinking.
In that context, I think one of your legacies as you leave the chair position at Global Impact and will still continue on the board, but leave the chair position, has been your work to help Global Impact with its strategic framework. And it's now doubled in size, over $2 billion to charity. Tell us a little bit about how you were able to marshal Global Impact through all of its transitions and have the impact you've had on reframing and repositioning this organization.
Well, that's another really long answer to a really complex question. It sounds simple, but it's not. But the question that gets people thinking is quite simple. And the question that I posed to the board then was, what could global impact be? Not what was it or what somebody else might think it is, but what could it be? What could it become that it currently isn't now? And how does that align with aspirations? And once you ask a question like that to a group of people who are enthusiastic and motivated and committed to an idea and making a difference like our board was, then there wasn't anything else that I particularly had to do, because that was the question and people rallied to it. And of course, I'm trying for you not to be too humble in this, Scott, but you had a vision of it. And the question was, how do we get to that vision? And how can we imagine these possible futures? And then once we do, how do we deliver on them? And again, it's the work of 20 some people who, were super focused and committed to making, good things happen. And they did. So, in a way, I was just kind of a cheerleader on the sideline going, let's go. Right?
Well, I think you set the stage, and that has been certainly one of your impacts on the organization and on all the work that we do. In fact, the board, thanks to that work, won the nonprofit award for outstanding board achievement. Steve, another legacy that I think of when I think of your 9 years as chair is the impact you've had on the young people of Global Impact. one of the things that you do is constantly make sure that you're introducing yourself, connecting to staff. When you think ahead, what kind of advice do you have for the next generation in terms of how they use their own story, how they shape their story to make a global impact?
Wow. These questions are really hard. A friend of mine says you can't give unsolicited advice. So I'm just going to give you some thoughts because none of these folks asked me for my advice. But I think that one of the things to not be afraid of is to own the story that you have. And I think that often people don't want to share their stories or how they think about the world because they're afraid they'll be criticized. But, there's something powerful in being open. There's something powerful in being vulnerable. And there's something powerful in meeting a circumstance from a trusting standpoint rather than from a skeptical one. And so I would encourage people to celebrate their stories, to find a way that those things can connect in a universal way to the things that they're addressing, because there is some connection there. And I think the quicker that folks can see that, the more fulfilling that is and the more inspiring it can be. And so I don't have any advice except to say that we all have some powerful stories in us, and they can lead us to the next really good thing if we share them with people.
And certainly during this time in which we're all experiencing COVID in different ways, but experiencing it together, our stories also begin to have a common bond as we think ahead. In fact, it's what encourages me to think that it will bring us together as a global community.
That certainly is the hope. Goodness knows that there have been lots of people suffering, and we can't really know. We can only make that individual commitment ourselves. So if we've been suffering, or we've seen our friends and colleagues and compatriots struggling and suffering, we can only make the commitment, I think, to ourselves to not let the compassion we're currently feeling and those actions that are sponsored by that, we're the only ones who can keep those going. And it's an individual by individual thing. And I hope that we all do that.
Steve, in preparing for this interview, I got a chance to talk to some of the staff and let them know that you were willing to do an interview and be part of the Make Your Global Impact series. And I asked the question, what do you most remember about the time and the work that you've had with our chair, Steve Polo? And two things came up time and again. One was your passion for our work and for making a global impact. And the second was your compassion for them and making them feel like they were a big part of the organization. So Steve Polo, we want to thank you for your global view, for the commitment you made not only to the kids of Soweto and the township and Nelson Mandela, but also to all the women and children and communities that are impacted by the work that Global Impact does. Thank you for doing this today.
Well, thank you, Scott. I'm humbled and honored to be asked. I'd like to say something about that last comment you made, that the passion and compassion that you say, the folks say I represent, really only comes from all the collective people at Global Impact. I mean, it doesn't just, it's not a thin air kind of thing. You don't grab up and get something, right? So when you talk to folks every day, and they're in a good way, they're relentless about their passion and compassion. I mean, you can't work at a place like Global Impact if you don't have compassion. You'd stick out like a sore thumb, right? So I think they deserve most of the credit on that, and So my hat's off to them and to you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all you do every day. And you're not off the hook. Steve Polo continues to be a board member and a leader of Global Impact.